Hi, welcome to Smart Talks. We're excited to have with us today my good friend Avremi Zippel. He is a Jewish rabbi and he has an incredible, amazing story. I am also here with my co-host, Neo Strong, who is the Smart Defense Director at the Elizabeth Smart Foundation. So we are very, very excited to be here today. And Remy, I would just like to begin to have you talk a little bit about yourself and what it was like for you growing up.
So first of all, thank you both very much for having me. It's really an honor to do this. So my story growing up. So I grew up here in Salt Lake City. My parents started the synagogue that I now work for in a professional capacity in July of 1992. And so growing up in that environment has been the life that I've known for pretty much my entire life. I was raised in a Jewish family. I was the oldest of six. My parents both worked for the synagogue, ran the synagogue, directed the synagogue. And so that was a very, I guess, all-encompassing, atmosphere. In a certain sense, neither of my parents had a 9-to-5 job. Our life as kids, every facet of it was part of the synagogue. And it was a very, fulfilling life, I guess I'd say. And it was one that I had always wanted from a very young age to follow in one day and to, live a life of service to others and, giving to my community. And it was something which really passionately affected me. One of the important, I guess, details of growing up as an observant Jew here in Salt Lake City is that there was no then, is still no now, formal Jewish education. And so my siblings and I were homeschooled. Utah back then was number one in the nation for homeschooling. I think it still is. And for all of the people that are complaining now about homeschooling during coronavirus, this was literally my life for my entire childhood. We were literally homeschooled, like in the home. And as a result of that, my dad was out doing rabbi things all day, and my mom was very much involved with the community. And at a certain age, my parents decided to hire full-time help at home to kind of have an extra, pair of hands around the house. And my parents hired a full-time nanny in the summer of 1998. My mom was pregnant with my little brother, who was number 5 in the family. And so we were kind of bunched closely together. And with his birth, our nanny began to work for us in the summer of 98. And about a year later, it was about a month after my 8th birthday, our nanny began sexually abusing me. It happened once, it happened more than once, and it kind of began a pattern, which would span through the better part of my childhood, at least the parts that I remember. After I turned 13, which in the Jewish faith is our bar mitzvah, when Jewish boys become a man, I left town to get a full-time Jewish education. I'd kind of gone beyond the scope of what was available for homeschooling, and I left town, which is very common in our circles, to attend a Jewish high school and get a more, permanent Jewish education. So I was not at home the majority of the year. Most of the school year I was out of town. I would be coming home for 2 or 3 weeks a year. 2 or 3 weeks at a time, a couple times a year for Jewish holidays and happy occasions, and etc. And obviously, with me not being home, my abuser had a lot less access to me. But the abuse continued, during those visits home and in its more limited capacity. But it continued to go on, and it would go on until my 18th birthday. After my 18th birthday, there was just less of us at home, with more of us being at school at that point, and my parents didn't need the full-time help anymore, and so they let my abuser go, and that was pretty much the end of it, as she was no longer around the house.
I think, you and I, we've known each other now for, let's see, it's been over a year.
A year and a half, yeah, almost a year and a half.
And I think for me, one of the most compelling parts of your story is that at the time that you during the abuse, that you didn't realize that it was abuse. And so could you just talk about this, how you eventually, this journey of discovery, if you will, of when you realized what happened to you was not normal?
So that's, I think, a very central part of it. As definitely as I look back on it, it is what I think brings a lot of the a lot of the healing. Obviously, it brings up a lot of the pain, and that's what leads to the healing. But I grew up in a very religious household, and sex ed was not something that we had a tremendous amount of. I was aware, I guess, on a certain level that there was something called sexual abuse. I think I knew what that was in the abstract. And for me, in my frame of reference, and even growing up into being a young adult, sexual abuse had a few very fundamental components, and that was pain and coercion. And so, by its definition, sexual abuse needed to be the situation where there was, this very scary perpetrator and this, adorable little girl, and there had to be this screaming no in order for it to sort of qualify as sexual abuse. As a child growing up in Utah, obviously, I was very taken by the story of Elizabeth Smart, and that was kind of, textbook sexual abuse. And whatever didn't have all of those components wasn't sexual abuse. And so, I guess in my mind, what I was going through, I think its most important qualifier in my mind, which is probably what led to the most emotional turmoil, for starters, was my fault. Abuse is clearly the fault of the abuser, but if it's not abuse, then it needs to, then equal blame needs to be laid at the feet of all the parties. And so, from my perspective, both myself and my abuser were both, equally at fault for engaging in this terrible, immoral behavior, which was on us. And her equally as me, but obviously I felt the part that was on me worse. And this would be my attitude until I was 20. It came about quite randomly. When I was 20, I broke my leg in a pickup basketball game, and I was on bed rest for 4 weeks in a cast, and I was binge watching TV shows. Again, we get the coronavirus reference, but yeah, I was doing that for 4 weeks. And of all things that I was binge watching, I was watching Law and Order Special Victims Unit. And there's this episode that I come across where there's a 16-year-old boy who is involved in all sorts of issues, and his mom discloses to the detectives that he had a, quote, sexual relationship with his nanny growing up, and he didn't understand that he hadn't done anything wrong and that this is abuse. And I remember watching this and I'm like, what? Now that can't even be true. Like, how does that even make sense? And for me, it was more comfortable not to think about it, because dealing with that would require really grappling with certain realities, which had been my reality for so long, and that was uncomfortable, and that was painful, and not something which I was interested in doing. I was much more comfortable, I thought at the time, just kind of being stuck in my frame of mind. And so that's kind of the attitude that I would go with until I saw my first therapist, my only therapist, my therapist, in 2016. And that's when we really had the conversations surrounding consent and surrounding being abused as a child, and all of those different parameters. And that's kind of what gave me the push to come forward about it and go to the police and talk about my story publicly. But for me, that lack of clarity about sexual abuse was really what allowed it to flourish for so long.
And I mean, I think that it's definitely become more socially acceptable for a woman to come forward and talk about being sexually abused, but you really don't hear that many men coming forward and talking about their sexual abuse. And I'm curious, did that make you hesitant to come forward because you'd kind of be putting a face to male sexual abuse? I mean, not as a victim, not as an abuser.
No, it did. Yeah, for sure. It did. And it was scary, for lack of a better term. There's a whole separate, beyond, I think, the generalization of the lack of male survivors of sexual abuse, at least in a public way. I was coming forward within a religious community where, sexual abuse was not a commonplace topic. Neither male nor female survivors, certainly not male survivors. And, I think I went through a process personally where that kind of, it evolved over time from being really scary and really lonely to, oddly inspiring. I think that after I got over the fact that I didn't have really a frame of reference, and I didn't have someone to talk to, and I didn't have someone who had gone through this who could, give me firsthand advice, as a guy, at that point, the thought process kind of morphed into, maybe this situation is here for you to make a difference about it. you know, maybe the exact reason why you are in the position that you are at this crossroads, and you look ahead and you don't see anybody, out there lighting the path for you, is so that you can do that for someone else. And that was really what kind of gave me the urge to, to come forward publicly and to see this through to, to the end of the justice system and all that. But it's a lonely path. It's a very lonely path. And, as I learned firsthand, throughout, my abuser's criminal trial, being a male survivor in the Me Too age is complicated. And yeah, it's definitely something which gives me an oomph to wake up with in the morning to change that, and to change that status quo, and to, make that difference for other people.
I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but at what point did you decide to share with your parents what had happened? I mean, did that come immediately, or did that take some time?
So things were kind of, I wouldn't say backwards, but it was, interesting how it all unfolded. My parents and my wife, without really knowing what was really bothering me at some level, urged me to get help. This was in February of 16. My wife and I had just been married for about 2 years. We had our first child. And looking back, I was in a very dark place. I was in a very, broken, sad, emotional place. And, as I look back on it now, I see the triggers, and I see the things that kind of pushed me there, and the issues that needed to be dealt with that weren't being dealt with, that were thus resulting in all of this negative energy. And so, sensing that things weren't the same, my wife and my parents urged me to go and see a therapist, and I did. And he was the first person that I ever spoke to and said, disclosed him that I had been sexually abused. And he really kind of gave me the tools to have that conversation subsequently with my parents and with my wife. It was extremely difficult to tell my parents. It was extremely difficult to tell my wife, but a very different kind of difficult. But, I think the difficulty in telling my parents, and subsequently members of my family, was kind of, I never wanted my parents to feel blamed. And I never wanted this conversation to be one of finger pointing and, and kind of throwing it back at them. How could you have done this to me? This happened on your watch. And it was a painful discussion. And it's something which took a lot of healing and takes a lot of healing. And it's during the closing arguments in my abuser's trial, I'll never forget, the prosecutor began her closing remarks by saying this extremely powerful line, which really, I've really kind of stuck with me since then. She said that, she told the jury that people misassociate sexual abuse as a gun. People think that sexual abuse is one person pointing a gun at another and firing at them. What people don't understand is that sexual abuse is a bomb. When it goes off, it doesn't affect one person. It doesn't affect 2 people or 5 people. It affects a town. It affects families, and it affects families' families and their friends and their wider community. And I remember hearing that, and I was like, wow, how true is that? And so, yeah, I think that's the lifelong journey for, someone like me, people like us, is accepting ourselves. And through accepting ourselves and being okay with ourselves, it's finding that peace and acceptance with those around us, and finding that ability to be ourselves.
And I mean, one of the things that I've found interesting, as just you and I have chatted over the years, is that coming forward, I mean, you're a hero. You are so courageous for coming forward, and especially within your religious community, especially within your Jewish faith, because you from what, I mean, the way I understand it in my mind is that it's almost a completely different set of social rules than what just your average everyday non-Jewish person lives by. And so that was, I mean, if you could just explain those a little bit, because I want people to understand, I mean, how incredibly brave you are for what you've done.
Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that. I'll share 2 interesting anecdotes. One is the similarities make my, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And so, I've joked about this a couple times, but, right now we're doing this virtual podcast because the world is suffering through this terrible pandemic of coronavirus. And what obviously as human beings, what we do now is, when this hits, we all look back and we realize how much we missed the warning signs, and whether we means we as individuals or our government or whoever it is, but how long we've possibly known about this and didn't take the necessary steps. And now, the world is in this place of suffering because of it. And frankly, I remember personally 3 weeks ago, before everything hit, coronavirus to me was this thing which was happening in China and Italy, I think. Italy, my dad's from Italy. I knew that his family was like a little displaced, but coronavirus was a source of great memes and some funny videos online. And it was happening in a different reality. It's happening in a different planet. It didn't exist here in the US. It's certainly not in Utah. We're this quiet state in the mountains. These things don't bother us. These are international issues. And then it does. All at once, it lands in your state and people are getting sick and you're stuck at home and you're like, oh, wow, they were right. This coronavirus thing is a reality, which affects me and affects my family, and my kids can't go to school and my grocery store is empty and so on and so on. I think that what's happened with coronavirus and the world in a span of a few weeks is a microcosm of how the world deals with larger issues over a much larger period of time. And I think that sexual abuse is a great example of that. I think that certain communities, certain worlds, certain isolated worlds firmly believe that sexual abuse is an issue which exists outside, somewhere else, in a land far, far away. Those people, the other people, they deal with sexual abuse. We are just inherently inoculated to it. It's not going to hit home. And that was kind of my struggle being in my community. I didn't know another observant rabbi who spoke out publicly about their sexual abuse. In my world, this didn't happen to observant Jews because I didn't know a single observant Jew who had ever spoken out publicly about it. And, again, that was a lonely process. And then it became an inspiring process of, okay, well, I don't believe that there's no other Jew in the world who's been sexually abused. I don't believe there's no one in my community who's been sexually abused. And if the world is looking for one person to speak out about it, maybe that should be me. Just because no one's done it before doesn't mean that no one should do it now. And I think that that's what happened within our community. Since I've come forward last February, I've had the privilege and the honor of getting to know dozens and dozens and dozens of survivors within our community, both male and female. And slowly, I think, the message seeps in that, this is a global pandemic. This is something which affects every ecosystem equally. I don't care what the religion is. I don't care what the skin color or the socioeconomic status, whatever it is. This is a global issue. And I think that as every community deals with that, they come to terms with it. They get out of their own denial, and it gives survivors that ability to feel welcome and safe and accepted for who they are. And I think, as a survivor, that's really all you can ever hope for in life.
And I'm not going to say your story has such a powerful ending, because your story's ongoing. It hasn't ended, but it has had a powerful continuation in that you pursued charges against this woman, and actually she was prosecuted. The charges stuck. I mean, you had your day in court, as uncomfortable and difficult as that can be, but I mean, it happened for you. Have you felt like that's been a positive thing for you, or do you feel like it was more traumatic than positive?
So if you're listening to this and you're considering pressing charges, you might want to tune out for the next 3 minutes. Don't want to dissuade you from doing what you think is right. I mean, let me put it this way. Our system is flawed. That's something which I deeply believe in. I don't think it's anybody's fault. I think it's a system which is just very big and tries to do a lot of things and doesn't necessarily do all of them right. I'm happy that I press charges. There is no greater vindication that you can get in the world than a jury coming back with a guilty verdict. I firmly believe that. At the same time, I feel like my trial, at least for me, was a very educational process. Was a very informative process, especially for male survivors. And I'll never forget, my abuser was actually arrested 2 years ago yesterday. March 30th was the day she was arrested, and I was out of town. It was Passover. It was a Jewish holiday. We were visiting my in-laws for the holiday. This was back when people traveled, for happy occasions. And I'll never forget the day she was arrested. We weren't kind of expecting it to happen that day. It was supposed to happen after the weekend. It happened on a Friday afternoon, and it was all sudden. And I'll never forget, I was just kind of standing outside the house, and I was just staring off into space. And my father-in-law walked by, and he said to me in the most, gentle, loving fashion, he says, "Do you feel any better now?" And I looked at him, I said, "Not really." And that was the truth. And, it was funny because a week and a half later, I got back to town and I met the prosecutor for the first time. And she shared with me, kind of the party line, which was drummed into my head at every turn. What happens in court won't make you whole. There's no punishment that your abuser can get, which will make you feel whole again. No one can give you back those years. No one can give you back that innocence. No one can give you back your childhood. Going through the justice system is an important thing for a lot of people. It was an important thing to me. It was something I wanted to do. And as it played out, I wanted to see it through. And I had, I had a certain goal in mind that I wanted to see. And, that wasn't going to be happening through a plea deal. And so I wanted it to go to trial. But I think that it drilled into me an important reality. And that is that you need to heal, period. You need to find your healing and do what it takes for you to feel like you have healed and continue to heal. A judge ain't going to give that to you. A jury's not going to give that to you. Jail time's not going to give that to you. You need to do your steps. You need to, do your work and let the system sort itself out on the other side. And so, for me, it was all in all a vindicating process. It was something which I'm happy I did. It was challenging, no question.
I'm curious, did you always know that you wanted to pursue this legally? Or was there like a turning point when you decided to press charges? Or how did that unravel?
So initially, I was adamantly not going to do it. And the reason for that was the fear of publicity. Mm-hmm. I remember adamantly saying to my therapist when we first started discussing it, I will not be Zippel, the guy who was sexually abused. That's not going to be my label. I have so many other labels. I live in Utah. I'm an anomaly as it is. I'm an observant rabbi. I look very different than all of my neighbors and people that I know. I'm already strange. I'm already unusual, and that's good. That's enough for me. I think what happened over time is that I became comfortable with that. If I was going to be Zippel, the guy who was sexually abused, then so be it. I'm comfortable with that in my own skin. And what I learned, I think the real turning point for me was that, and I referenced this before, our concern, what other people will think about us or say about us, is really a reflection of how we think about ourselves. And so the moment that I was comfortable, getting up in front of anybody and everybody and saying, "Hi, I was sexually abused as a child. I love myself. Notwithstanding that, I accept myself, notwithstanding that, I don't judge myself for that," then I could expect and anticipate to hear that and feel that from people around me. And so once I was comfortable with that, and once I knew my options, that for me was the turning point. That, that will probably become my defining part of my life. So be it. I have had the good fortune, and I had the good fortune, before deciding to make that decision, of meeting people like Elizabeth who, go through life with that label and live a remarkable life and a full life and live a life of giving to others. And that was powerful. And that was really kind of the turning point is that's me. I'm okay with it.
Well, I've been quiet during this whole thing because I'm just so in awe of you. And I can only imagine the ripple effect this is going to have for good. And that is the best to me, like justice. Like you are taking this and creating something positive out of it. Oh, mad respect to you.
Thank you, Mia.
Just in awe. I want to hear more. Keep talking.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I know, but this has become more for you, hasn't it? I mean, you're doing all sorts of stuff now.
It has. It has, and I'm fortunate for that. I've had the ability to meet amazing people, and by that I mean people who have come before me, people whose stories have impacted me, and people who I've met through my story being told that that I've had the privilege of having an impact on. And if there's one thing that I've learned throughout all of this, and this has really kind of been a guiding light for me, people will come up to me, people will reach out and they'll say, I read your story. I wanted to share with you my story. It's not the same as yours. Or what will really, get me, people will say it's not as bad as yours, which, makes my skin crawl because, we don't live in a world where someone has a monopoly on pain and suffering. And, and I don't believe that the more adversity you go through, the more damage points you get. And, and there's kind of like this ranking system of, how much pain we've suffered. People are amazing. There are amazing, amazing human beings out there who have amazing stories and live these amazing lives. And the amount that I've benefited from meeting people who have wanted to reach out to me to learn something from me. And I've ended up learning so much more from them instead, is what, motivates me to keep on wanting to meet people. I've really been affected by the incredible power of humanity. And just the ability that human beings have to connect through their struggles and through their adversity and to inspire each other and to give to each other. And it's, to me, it's what keeps the world going, and it's what, makes you want to do more.
I think everything that you've just said speaks to how far that you've come, because I don't think you experience abuse one day and then wake up the next day saying exactly what's come out of your mouth just now. I think that is such a powerful moment. And even myself, like when you were saying people come up to you all the time and say, I've experienced something similar, but nothing in comparison, I couldn't agree with you more. I swear, if someone says that to me again, I just want to smack them, because at the end of the day, pain is pain, and you're absolutely right. Nobody has a corner on the market of pain. We all experience it, and it doesn't make yours any less by comparing it to someone else's. Maybe just makes you feel bad or probably makes you feel bad for thinking I'm so weak because they went through this and they're okay. And
Right.
I've just loved everything you said, because I think it's so right. And human beings are amazing and creative and brilliant and inspiring. And to your point, I think one of the most inspiring things that we will any of us ever see is the resiliency that the human spirit has, that you can go through these horrendous nightmares and yet come back, and not just come back to a place of equilibrium, but a place of happiness and positivity and wanting to give, a place of giving. I think that is just so inspirational. And to hear you say that and to hear you share your story and really this journey that you've been on is just amazing. What do you want to do? Is this something you plan to continue on or to pursue? Do you see yourself going down that path?
So I want to share a story. I think it's a story that Elizabeth knows, and she'll have to pardon me if you hear it from me again. One of the very pivotal moments that really led me to where everything is today and really led to this conversation is right when my case was in the justice system, but I wasn't coming out. I had come out publicly about it, which I knew was going to kind of coincide with testifying for the first time in court, and it was about 4 months away from that. I had the fortune of meeting my congressman at a community event. My congressman is Chris Stewart, who co-wrote Elizabeth's book. And when I had started this journey, one of the books that I had been told to read was Elizabeth's, kind of about owning your stuff and life. And so I met Chris Stewart at an event, and we had chatted a number of times. He's literally my congressman. I live in his district, and and he's a great friend of Israel. And we had talked about a number of political issues. And so I got him alone for a minute at the event, and I told him that I wanted to chat with him about a personal matter, and I shared with him that I had read yours and his book and how deeply it had impacted me. And thank you very much. And he turned to walk away, and he turned back at me. And he says, would you like to chat with Elizabeth? Do you think that would be something beneficial for you? And I remember blurting it out at him. I said, why would Elizabeth Smart want to talk to me? Like, sure, I'd be honored, but so I'll never forget what he said. And he turns to me and he says, well, if it would be beneficial to you, I'm sure is what Elizabeth would want to do. So Elizabeth, he's been signing you up for things now for a while, but but he made this comment to me, and sure enough, he connected us about a month and a half later, and that comment that he made really impacted me deeply. The notion of my story is out there, for anybody, and if somebody comes across this story that might benefit from it, how can I be of service to them? There was kind of this moment where I was like, one day, if I ever tell my story, I want that to be my mantra in life. And a lot of it comes, from the same attitude that I had referenced earlier, kind of a sense of responsibility. Um, you know, I often talk with fellow survivors that I've met, and we have this kind of this hypothetical conversation. Our lives have become so enriched and so full and so blessed through this journey that we've gone through, and we almost engage in this, what if we had a chance to do it over? What would we choose? Would we choose the childhood that we had, or would we choose, the quote unquote normal, idyllic childhood where, we played with our balls or our dolls or whatever it is that we would play with? And I've gone through this a number of times and been in a different headspace a number of times, and I've had these conversations. And as bizarre as it sounds, I've come to a place where I wouldn't trade in my childhood for anything, because, with everything that it came with and with all of the pain and suffering that it brought, what a blessed life I've had the good fortune of being able to live from this point forward, and how much good have I been able to affect in the world as a result of that, and how many amazing connections have I made as a result of that. And for me, that's kind of the attitude moving forward is, if I'm on this path, I'm on this path for a reason, and there's good that I can do and should do and must do. And if there's anybody that I can keep on benefiting, then I need to do that. I want to do that, because why else am I here? Why else was I given this opportunity? So I testified for the first time, it was a Tuesday, February 5th. And I had worked with a local journalist here with the Deseret News to tell my story for the first time. We knew that in court documents, I was initialed. So, in the court documents and the information that was made public after my abuser's arrest, I was AZ, which, maybe some people figured out who I was, maybe they didn't, but I was going to testify in open court. And at that point, the game was up. Anyone could come and see. And so I worked with this reporter to time my coming out with the day of my initial testimony. And so I went in the morning and I testified, and that was an experience unto itself. And then that evening, my story was published around 5 o'clock. And so I put it on social media, and, that night, none of us got a lot of sleep. And it was, everyone was calling and texting. And that night, there was this monumental snowstorm here in Salt Lake City. It was like, one of the few days in Salt Lake where school shut down because of snow. It was the next day. It was Wednesday morning. And we woke up in the morning, the little bit of sleep that we got. And my wife remembered that we were out of diapers. And so, the driveway was blocked in. I had to walk to the store in the snow to get diapers for my son. And I'm walking to the store, and I get a phone call from a totally random number. And I pick up the phone, and this guy had called the synagogue office in tears, and someone had given him my cell phone number, and he's sobbing on the phone. This is a Jew from Virginia, somewhere near Washington, D.C., and he's just sobbing on the phone, you have no idea how many lives you've saved. And then he hung up. So we were on the phone for maybe 45 seconds, and it's snowing outside. It's a blizzard, and I'm trying to, slog to my supermarket to get diapers. And this guy's sobbing, and then he's gone. And there was kind of like a pinch me, I'm dreaming moment. Like I checked my phone to make sure he had actually called and I wasn't hallucinating that, that this had happened. And I remember right then standing outside in the snow, and I turned to God, and I hadn't had any sort of reasonable expectation for what was going to happen. I figured some people would be like, oh, wow, cool. Good for you. We're sorry to hear what happened to you. And this random guy is calling from Virginia, and he's crying. And I remember turning to God at that moment. I was like, okay, I got the message loud and clear. Fine. I will keep on keeping on. No problem. And, and there's always been moments like that. And there's always been, these signs and these messages when you really need them of, you're doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing. And people appreciate it, and God appreciates it, and, keep on doing that. And it's appreciated. And You know, I find that those episodes happen when they're most needed, and you know, when you feel down about yourself. And you know, Elizabeth, I'm sure you can relate to this. We come forward, we do our thing, you know, we talk about it. We're also healing. You know, we're also going through our days and our good days and our better days. And you know, it's not something that you'll ever fix. It's not something which you'll ever, you know,
As cliche as it sounds.
right. You know, a few months ago, my son got a puzzle. He was very excited. It was a big puzzle. It was like a 20-piece puzzle. And he did the puzzle over and over and over again. And at some point, one of the pieces got missing. And it was a big tragedy at home. We looked and looked and looked and looked and looked for the puzzle, and the missing piece was nowhere to be found. And so my wife said to my son, okay, you know, maybe we can do the puzzle with the missing piece. So, you know, well, that train will be missing its caboose. And he said, no, you know, there's no such thing as a puzzle with a missing piece. And I remember hearing that conversation. I was like, you know, I kind of feel like our lives are the puzzle that's missing a piece. And, you know, and there's this perception that if you do enough, you'll get all the pieces back. You'll put all the pieces back together and great, you know, you're good as new. And I think for me, part of healing is no, you know, no, I'll always be a puzzle with a missing piece. But what I'll come to realize is how beautiful the puzzle is with a missing piece. And there is a certain quality to the puzzle with a missing piece that the puzzle wouldn't have if it had all 20 pieces. You know, there's something that's done to the picture as that train is missing its back end that brings out just this unique beauty that it wouldn't have otherwise. And for me, I think that's kind of the, you know, the reality check is, you know, that's me, that's my story, that's who I am, that's my life. And the more I'm comfortable with that, the better.
Well, Avremi, your spirit is contagious. Your hope, I'd say, is viral. And that's exactly what we need right now. And I can't wait to talk to you again. And I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us and spread your positivity, because I'm just sitting here smiling like an idiot, feeling warm fuzzies on the inside after having talked to you for the last 45 minutes. And I'm your biggest fan. I think you're amazing.
Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth. It's mutual. You know that.
Back again.
Thanks, guys.
How can
Appreciate
people find
it. Thank you so much.
How can people find you? Or how can they follow your story?
I'm on social media. I'm on social media at Utah Rabbi, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You know, I can put my email address here. I try to be very open and, you know, and available to people. And hopefully in the next little bit, my story will come out. We'll see. We're having a number of conversations, and we'll see where it goes. And, you know, hopefully it'll be out there in a complete format sometime in the future. Time will tell. But for now, I'm on social media. Feel free to reach out to me. It's Avremis Story, AVREMIS Story, @gmail.com. And feel free to be in touch.
Okay. Oh, I so appreciate the time today, and I look forward to the next podcast with you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, and thank you everyone for tuning in to Smart Talks, and we look forward to having you again next time. Thanks.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.